story of a survivor.
Do you believe hell is real? Have you ever imagined what it would be like to witness with your own eyes the eternal torments we hear so much about? What I'm going to share today could completely change your view of what happens after death. This is not just a story, it is a frightening and revealing account that made me understand truths that many ignore. Truths that perhaps you need to hear too. Imagine a place where the fire never goes out, where screams of pain echo eternally, and where there is no hope, only despair. Hell is not a distant or symbolic concept. It is a real place, scarier than anything you can imagine. Everything you think you know about damnation, salvation, and eternal life will be put to the test here as you dive with me into this testimony that challenged everything I believed. When I experienced what felt like a glimpse of the Last Judgment, something inside me changed forever. I saw souls crying out for mercy, trapped in endless suffering. I saw demons that feed on fear and human pride, with a look that seemed to pierce the soul. Every detail of this place was filled with terror and suffering, and the only thing I could think was, why am I here? What does that mean? The experience was more than a vision. It was a call to understand the deepest, darkest aspects of existence. Many live their lives ignoring the weight of the choices they make, but what I was shown in hell revealed that every decision, every seemingly insignificant act, has eternal spiritual consequences. Did you know that hell is more than fire and darkness? It is built with the traps that many of us ignore. Pride, lies, betrayal, hatred, and perhaps most dangerous of all, indifference. It's not just a place of punishment. It's a direct consequence of the doors we open while we're alive. And the scariest thing? It's just that no one notices these doors until it's too late. While I was there, I heard truths that no one dares to mention. Truths that Satan tries to hide from you. Because if you knew what was really at stake, it would completely change your life. These truths were burned into my mind, not to haunt me, but to awaken me, and perhaps awaken you. Have you ever stopped to think about the small choices you make every day? In those lies that seem innocent? In the attitudes driven by selfishness? In the lack of forgiveness that you carry in your heart? Hell is full of people who underestimated the impact of these decisions, who ignored the signs and continued living as if they would never face the consequences. In this story, you will discover what happens when the soul is faced with eternity. You will understand why so many people believe that hell is just a myth, while it is more real than the ground you walk on now. Believe me, what I saw was as real as the air you breathe right now. What would you do if you knew there was a spiritual battle going on right now all around you? An invisible but powerful fight for your soul. Being aware of this is the first step to seeing the truths that no one has ever told you. Truths that can change your destiny forever. Get ready to dive with me into this impactful story, full of revelations that will make you question everything. The gates of hell are not opened all at once. They are unlocked little by the choices we make. And once they open, the way back is not as simple as it seems. If you think you are prepared to hear what I saw, or if you believe that nothing can shake your beliefs, continue. What's to come is not just a report. It is a direct confrontation with the most hidden truths about eternity. But before continuing this in-depth story, I want to make a special request of you. Write in the comments a prayer, a cry, or even a request that you want us to pray for together. Prayer is our most powerful weapon against darkness, our direct channel with God, and it is through it that miracles happen. In hell, I saw how much the enemy fears the prayers of God's children. Each prayer is a flame of light that no darkness can extinguish. Let's do something special here. Create a space of faith and unity. By leaving your prayer in the comments, we will be spiritually connected, strengthening each other and crying out together for God's mercy. No matter the size of your struggle, God hears those who give themselves to Him from the heart. If this testimony has already touched your heart, leave a like so that this message reaches more people who need to hear this truth. And if you are not yet registered, take the opportunity to sign up now. Here we talk about revelations, transformation, and how God can change lives. Don't miss the next stories, because I will share experiences that could change the course of your eternity. So be part of this. Pray, comment, and connect. Let's build a circle of faith together, because what's coming is much bigger than we imagine. God has a purpose for you, and perhaps this message is the first step in finding out what it is. My life before this experience was a routine like many people's. Days filled with worries about work, complicated relationships, and the search for something that would fill the void inside me. No matter what I did, it always felt like something was missing, like an essential part of my existence was missing. I considered myself a rational person, far from superstitions or deep beliefs. Faith, for me, was something that people used as a crutch, an emotional outlet to deal with life's challenges. I had answers for almost everything, but at the same time, I carried an unsettling silence in my soul that I couldn't explain. There were times when I felt something was wrong, but I ignored it. You know that inner voice that sometimes whispers that you need to change something? I silenced her with distractions. For me, hell was a distant idea, an invention used to scare or control. I never imagined it could have any connection with something so dark or spiritual. But looking back, I realized that my life was full of open doors that led me to the brink of that abyss. Pride, selfishness, and little lies were part of my daily life, but they were so normal that I never saw the danger behind them. I was someone who liked to test limits. And, to be honest, my curiosity led me to explore things that I now understand as spiritually dangerous. Books, films, conversations. Everything seemed innocent. But little by little, I was drawn into a field where the unknown began to surround me. Deep down, something inside me knew I was playing with fire, but the logic I held dear told me it was all just paranoia. It's funny how we ignore the signs when they're right in front of us. Little coincidences, strange dreams, that feeling of being watched, all of this now makes sense. And then came the day when everything changed. I remember feeling an uneasiness that I couldn't explain. It was an ordinary night, but there was something in the air that felt different. A feeling of heaviness came over me, as if something invisible was pressing down on me. It was at that moment that I began to reflect on my choices, the paths I had taken, and the people I had hurt along the way. It wasn't regret, not yet, but an uncomfortable realization that perhaps I didn't have as much control over my life as I believed. Life has a strange way of confronting us with the things we would rather avoid. And that night, I was confronted in a way I never would have imagined possible. There was no tragedy in progress, no extraordinary event at first glance, just a deep silence, followed by an inexplicable tiredness that took over me. I closed my eyes for a moment, and when I opened them again, everything around me seemed different. The environment, the air, even the light in the room seemed to have changed. Something was happening, but I couldn't understand what. It was at this point that I began to realize that my entire life had been preparation for this moment. Every choice, every mistake, every detour had led me here. It was as if the boundaries between the physical and the spiritual had been erased, and I was about to cross over into something greater, something my rational mind could never comprehend. It was then that I felt, for the first time, a spiritual weight, as if something was pulling me away from what I knew as reality. The feeling of helplessness was overwhelming. I was alone, without explanations, without understanding what was happening. But at that moment, something began to become clear to me. The emptiness I had felt my entire life was a reflection of something bigger, something I was about to face head-on. My choices, once considered insignificant, began to flash before my eyes, each carrying a weight I had never realized before. Have you ever felt this way? As if your entire life was a sequence of decisions that suddenly took on greater meaning? That was exactly how I felt, but at the same time it was deeper, more overwhelming. Every decision, every seemingly harmless act, seemed to be connected to something I couldn't fully understand. It was at this point that I began to wonder, what if what I believed about life and death was wrong? What if there was something much bigger than I ever imagined? What happened that night was just the beginning of a journey I never could have anticipated. I didn't know it, but I was about to face something that would change my life forever. And all the while, I felt like everything inside me was preparing for a confrontation, not just with the unknown, but with myself. Every choice, every thought, and every small action was about to be placed in a new light, and nothing would be the same as before. If you have ever felt like your life is being led by something bigger than yourself, leave it here in the comments. I feel that way too. Let's reflect together on what our choices say about the destiny of our soul. Everything began to change in ways that seemed impossible to understand. As I reflected on my choices, I felt a growing weight weighing down on me, as if the air itself was becoming denser, suffocating. It was a feeling I couldn't ignore, and as much as I tried to rationalize it, something inside me knew I was about to experience the unexplainable. Then it happened, something that, to this day, still seems more like a nightmare than reality. Suddenly, the environment around me began to transform. What was once familiar began to fade, as if being peeled away, layer by layer, until only a shadowy void remained. The silence became deafening, and all I could hear was the sound of my own heavy breathing, mixed with a faint hum that seemed to echo from all sides. It was at that moment that I realized something far beyond human understanding was happening. I felt my body being pulled, as if an invisible force was dragging me to a place I never wanted to visit. There was no resistance possible. It was as if my soul was being separated from me, taken to a place that transcended the physical world. An inexplicable cold took over my being, but it wasn't an ordinary cold. It was as if my very essence was being consumed. As everything around me grew darker and darker, distorted shapes began to appear, shadows that moved erratically, as if they had a life of their own. Every shadow seemed to be alive, watching, waiting. And then came the smell, a sickening odor, a mixture of burnt sulfur and something even worse, something I couldn't identify but that permeated my body and made my heart race with pure terror. As the darkness intensified, I began to hear sounds. They were no ordinary sounds but screams so deep and anguished that they echoed inside me. It was as if each voice carried centuries of pain, despair, and regret. The screams came from all directions, blending into a symphony of suffering that I could never have imagined. And the most terrifying thing was that I felt that somehow I was becoming part of that scene. Then I saw the ground beneath me disappear. There was nothing solid left, just an infinite abyss that seemed to swallow everything. Extreme heat began to rise, but it was unlike any heat I had ever experienced. It wasn't just physical, it was spiritual, burning not just the body but the soul. The feeling of emptiness and despair was so overwhelming that I began to feel a deep pain, a pain that had no physical origin, but that seemed to consume everything I was. It was at this moment that the voices began to become clearer. Some begged for mercy, others screamed in pure desperation, and there were those who simply laughed in a way that chilled every part of my being. It was a laugh full of evil, of contempt, as if they knew something that I didn't know, but that I was about to discover. Laughter echoed around me, and it was then that I realized I wasn't alone. As I looked around, I saw shapes begin to materialize in the darkness. Grotesque, inhuman figures with eyes that glowed like embers. They watched me, analyzing every part of me, as if they were deciding something. Their presence was oppressive, filled with an evil that I never thought could exist. It was then that one of them approached and spoke. "You belong here," said the voice, hoarse and full of hate. "You always belonged." Those words resonated within me like thunder, bringing with them a weight that seemed to crush my soul. I wanted to scream, run, do anything to escape, but there was nowhere to go. It was as if every decision I had made in my life had led me to this moment, this place. The reality of what was happening began to dawn on me. This wasn't just a nightmare. It wasn't an illusion. I was faced with something that was more real than anything I had ever experienced. Hell was not just an idea, a metaphor, or a tale used to scare. He was real, and I was there. As I tried to process what was happening, the figures around me began to move, each toward their own torment, carrying invisible chains that seemed to weigh more than the entire world. And, amidst all of this, a brutal truth began to emerge. Hell is not just a place of punishment. It is a reflection of the choices we make in life. Every current, every scream, every suffering seemed to be connected to something specific, something these souls had carried with them. If you believe there are invisible forces all around us, write in the comments, "I know we are not alone." Or if something in your life has already made you reflect on the choices you make, leave your story. Your voice matters. When I realized that I was actually in hell, I was overcome by a feeling that I could never fully explain. It wasn't just the fear, although the fear was there, like a constant shadow, enveloping everything. It was something deeper, a crushing realization that this place was not just a punishment, but an eternal state. Every second seemed to drag by like an eternity. There was no time, no escape, just a constant presence of pain and despair. The first thing I noticed was the floor, or lack thereof. It wasn't solid like we're used to feeling. It was as if I was walking on something that shouldn't be there, something that changed with each step, like hot ash mixed with sand. But that seemed alive, always in motion. It was difficult to balance, as if the ground itself wanted to swallow me. All around me was an eternal sky of darkness, but it was no ordinary void. It was a kind of darkness so dense that it seemed to have weight, pressing against my skin, as if it wanted to crush me. The air was unbreathable, thick, full of sulfur and something else, something rotten, as if the whole place was permeated with decay. Every breath was a struggle, a constant reminder that nothing here would be easy. Everything, from the suffocating heat to the sounds around me, seemed designed to shatter whatever trace of humanity was left in whoever was there. And the sounds, those were the worst. Screams, wails, moans, all mixed in a chaos that never ceased. Each scream was unique, filled with stories that I didn't know, but could feel. It was as if the sound itself carried the weight of the souls trapped there, each lamenting their own mistakes, their own regrets. All around me, I began to see shapes. At first, they were just shadows, indistinct outlines that moved in the darkness. But as my eyes adjusted, I began to realize they weren't just shadows. They were people, or what was left of them. Each of them seemed to be weighed down by something, some kind of invisible weight that kept them trapped, unable to move freely. Their expressions were pure despair. Their eyes reflected an emptiness I had never seen before. Some were crying, others were screaming, and there were those who simply stared into space, as if they had already given up on all hope. But what caught my attention the most was the environment. Hell was not just a place of fire, as we are so often shown. Yes, there were flames, and they were so intense they seemed alive. But the scenario was much more complex. It was as if the entire place was a prison, but not an ordinary prison. Each space seemed specifically designed to reflect the mistakes and sins of whoever was there. It was as if each soul was confined in its own torment, a torment that was not imposed by someone else, but was a direct manifestation of their choices in life. There were areas where people appeared to be trapped in mirrors, facing distorted reflections of themselves. Elsewhere, there were those who walked forever, always trying to reach something they could never touch. And then there were the flames. Not the ordinary fire we know, but something much deeper. It was as if the fire was made of pain, fueled not by wood or fuel, but by the very souls that were trapped there. When one of these souls was consumed by flames, their screams would echo in a way that was impossible to ignore. I tried looking up, but there was nothing. There was no sky, no stars, no light, just an infinite darkness that seemed to descend like a curtain over everything. Somehow, this absence of light was even more terrifying than the flames themselves. It was a constant reminder that this place was completely cut off from any hope, from any trace of kindness. As I walked, I realized I was not alone. Other shapes began to appear in the darkness, figures that were not human, but that were clearly in control of the place. Demons. Their presence was oppressive, and it was impossible to look directly at them. Not because they were physically terrible, although they were, but because their presence carried an evil so pure, so absolute, that it was like a direct blow to the soul. They didn't need to speak to impose fear. His mere existence did that. That's when one of them approached me. He was immense, far larger than any human being, with eyes that glowed an intense red, like live coals. He didn't say anything at first, just watched me, as if he were assessing my soul, weighing every choice I'd ever made. And then he spoke, his voice like thunder that echoed inside me. "You are here because you chose to be." Those words were engraved in my mind like a seal, and everything around me seemed to become even heavier. That sentence, so simple, carried a brutal truth. Every choice, every act, every thought I had in life had led me there. It was not a punishment imposed by another, but something I had constructed myself. And in that moment, I realized that hell is not just a place. It is a reflection of our own actions, our own decisions. If you've ever reflected on how your choices can shape what comes next, write in the comments, "My choices define my path." Or if you've ever felt like something bigger is watching our decisions, share your experience. Your story can make a difference to someone. With every step I took in that place, I realized that hell was not just a space of torment, but a dark extension of what we carry in life. It was as if every inch of that environment was designed to reflect the mistakes, weaknesses, and choices that had led us there. And even more terrifying was realizing that hell did not need to create new torments. It only intensified and eternalized what already existed in each soul. The traps I saw there were not simple physical prisons. They were much deeper, tying each individual into an eternal cycle of suffering that seemed personalized. There was no single torment like another. Each soul seemed trapped in something that was a direct reflection of their own life. Some were enveloped in flames that danced around them, but these flames were not common. They seemed alive, as if they had consciousness, consuming not the body, but the deepest traces of who they were. Each scream that echoed carried not only pain, but regret, as if every soul there understood, too late, the weight of the choices they had made. Hell is full of subtle traps, and that's the most terrifying part. There are no chains or bars that hold people there. It is their own actions, their own thoughts, their own desires that turn them into prisoners. I remember seeing a man trapped in an endless cycle of searching for something he could never achieve. He ran and ran, but the object of his pursuit always seemed to get further away. When I looked closer, I realized he wasn't just running after something, he was running away. Running away from yourself, your choices, your lies. Elsewhere, I saw a woman surrounded by mirrors that reflected distorted versions of herself. Each reflection seemed to whisper something different, but it wasn't easy to understand. So, I listened. The whispers were the judgments she had made against others. Every criticism, every harsh word, every condemnation that had left her mouth. Now these reflections stared back at her, multiplying their own judgments against her, until she could barely bear it. His hands tried to cover his ears, but it was useless. The whispers weren't coming from outside, came from inside her. And that's the scariest thing, realizing that the pitfalls of hell begin long before we get there. They start with small choices that seem insignificant. A little pride here, a lie there, the lack of forgiveness we feed day after day. At first we think these things are weightless, but over time they grow, strengthen, until they become invisible chains that we carry with us wherever we go. Hell does not create these chains. It only makes them visible. I also saw what seemed to be a deep valley, full of souls who were kneeling with their hands extended upwards, as if they were begging for something. At first, I thought they were praying, crying out for help. But as I got closer, I realized that wasn't it. They were not crying out to God. They were crying out for everything they had idolized in life. Some called for money, others for power, some even for people they had placed above all else. Their voices were desperate, but what they asked for never came. And that was their torment, eternally wanting something they could never have. Hell's traps also play with our memories. As I walked, I began to realize that the place had a way of bringing up moments from the past, but not in a nostalgic or comforting way. It was as if he relived your worst moments, your failures, your sins, so vividly that you felt like you were experiencing it all over again. A woman next to me screamed incessantly, saying she didn't want to watch anymore. When I looked at her, I saw that her eyes were fixed on something that wasn't there for me. She was reliving something, a moment of betrayal perhaps, or a choice that had destroyed not just her life, but the lives of others. It was impossible to ignore how pride was one of the biggest traps. Many who were there wore an expression of disbelief, as if they still could not accept that their choices had led them to that place. They refused to surrender, even in hell, and this refusal only made the torment even worse. A figure in the distance seemed to be debating with the air itself, trying to justify its actions, trying to prove that it deserved better. But the more he spoke, the more he seemed to be consumed by something invisible, as if the very words he spoke were condemning him. And then I understood. Hell is not just a place of punishment. It is a place of reflection. But this reflection comes too late. It's like a mirror that reflects everything we were, but also shows what we could have been if we had made different choices. There is no escape, because you cannot escape yourself. If you have ever felt that some choices in your life have trapped you in some way, leave in the comments. I want to break my chains. Or if you've noticed how small decisions can have big consequences, share your thoughts. Let's talk about how we can change our ways before it's too late. As I continued in that scene of desolation and torment, I felt something was changing. It was as if the environment around me grew heavier, more oppressive, announcing the presence of something even more terrifying. The air, which was already difficult to breathe, became suffocating. The absolute silence that, for a brief moment, had dominated the place was broken by low, guttural sounds, as if something was slowly approaching, taking its time to reveal itself. It wasn't just any sound. He seemed to vibrate deep within my soul, awakening a sense of vulnerability I had never experienced before. It was then that I saw them. At first, they were just shadows, indistinct shapes that seemed to emerge from the ground, rising as if they were part of that place. But as my eyes adjusted, the shadows began to take shape. These entities were different from the tormented souls I had seen before. They had a presence that dominated the room, a dark power that seemed to emanate from each of them. They were tall, disproportionate, with grotesque shapes that seemed to defy logic itself. His eyes, if we could call them eyes, glowed with a fiery light like live coals. There was no doubt in my mind that these creatures were not human. They were something completely different, something I had never encountered or even imagined. Every move they made seemed calculated, as if they were sizing up everything around them, and every look they gave carried a sense of absolute judgment. When one of them finally noticed me, I felt like I had been stripped of any protection or secret. It was as if that look went through not just my body, but my soul, seeing every mistake, every wrong choice, every weakness that I never wanted to admit. One of them started to approach. His steps were slow, but each one of them seemed to echo, reverberating throughout the space. The proximity revealed details I wish I had never seen. His skin was uneven, covered in marks that looked like scars, but scars that told stories of evil and pain. He watched me with a look that didn't express anger or hatred, but something worse, a cruel pleasure, a satisfaction in seeing my fear. When he finally spoke, his voice seemed to come from every direction at once, a deep, husky sound that made my heart race. "You always belonged here," he said, his words echoing like thunder. "Your choices have brought you here. Every decision, every thought, every step taken away from the light. They were all recorded." Those words hit me like a blow. They carried a weight I couldn't explain, a dark truth I didn't want to accept. It was as if he had revealed something I already knew, but had spent my entire life trying to ignore. And then, he laughed. A deep, cruel laugh that seemed to vibrate in the air around me. I tried to look away, but it was impossible. It was as if that being had complete dominance over my attention, over my own will. Other entities began to join the first. Each of them was unique, but equally terrifying. Some had humanoid shapes, but distorted, as if they were corrupted versions of something that was once beautiful. Others had no defined shapes, looking more like liquid shadows that moved in an unnatural way. Each seemed to carry its own evil, its own specialty in inflicting suffering, and despite being different, they all shared the same look, a look that not only judged, but seemed to feed on fear and guilt. It was at that moment that I realized the true nature of those entities. They were not there to punish randomly. They were like jailers, but not ordinary jailers. They were judges, relentless observers who maintained order in the chaos, ensuring that each soul received exactly what it deserved. And the scariest thing was realizing that they didn't need to force anything. Hell seemed to work on its own, like a finely tuned machine, where each torment was perfectly synchronized with the sins of the person experiencing it. As I watched these creatures, I began to understand something even deeper. They not only imposed suffering, they also represented what we often feed in our own lives: pride, greed, hatred, lust. Each of these elements seemed to manifest itself in them, transforming into something living, something tangible. It was as if each demon was the personification of a sin, a physical representation of that which separates us from the light. And then, something unexpected happened. One of the entities approached even closer, until its presence became almost unbearable. He tilted his head, as if curious, and said something that stuck in my mind forever. "You saw the traps, but you never bothered to avoid them. And now, they are part of you." These words came as a shock. I always thought I had control over my life, that my choices were my own, and that they didn't have that much of an impact. But at that moment, I realized how wrong I was. The control I thought I had was an illusion, and these creatures were living proof of that. They didn't need to force me into anything, because I had already bound myself with my own chains. If you have ever felt that invisible forces influence our decisions, write in the comments. I want to open my eyes to the truth. Or if something you can't explain has made you reflect on your choices, share your story. Together we can discover more about what lies beyond what we can see. As she was surrounded by the dark entities and the crushing weight of that place, something began to change. It wasn't a visible change, but something internal, as if the environment itself began to communicate with me. That's when I began to realize that hell wasn't just a place of torment, it was also a place of revelation, where everything that was hidden, all the truths we avoided in life, were mercilessly exposed. Every detail, every scene around me, seemed to contain a message, as if hell itself was a living and terrible lesson for those who arrived there. The revelations didn't come as words or direct teachings, but through visions, moments that were so vivid they seemed to happen right in front of me. In one of these visions, I saw a long line of people, each carrying an invisible load that seemed to bend their bodies. At first I thought it was just another scene of suffering, but then I realized that the burdens were not imposed on them. They were choices, actions, and regrets that they carried with them, accumulated throughout their lives. It was as if, when they crossed the border to that place, everything they had ignored, hidden or justified came to light, materializing as burdens impossible to bear. One of the figures in the queue caught my attention. It was a man who was staring at something on the ground as if he was trying to avoid the gaze of others. He seemed to mutter to himself, repeating something like a mantra. Then, as if pulled by an invisible force, he began walking towards a dark cave that opened up in front of him. Inside, I heard voices, familiar voices that seemed to mock him, to accuse him. It was as if this place was confronting the man with all the moments he chose to ignore the consequences of his actions. And the scariest thing was that he couldn't look away. He couldn't run away. He was trapped, forced to face every mistake he had made. Another vision that was shown to me left me completely speechless. I saw a crowd of people trapped in a valley, their eyes fixed on something above them. When I looked up, I saw a bright light, so intense it was impossible to ignore. But instead of feeling hope, these people looked terrified. Their screams echoed across the valley, as if the light itself was burning them. It was then that I realized the light was not something that condemned them. It was the truth. The truth about who they were, about the choices they made, and about the presence of the God they had rejected. The light exposed everything, every thought, every intention, and it was more unbearable to them than any other pain hell could inflict. These revelations started to make me think about my own life. How many times have we taken the easy way out, ignored what we knew was right, or allowed our pride and ego to guide us? Hell, I realized, is not a place of arbitrary punishment. It is a consequence, a physical and spiritual manifestation of everything we neglect in life. Every scene I saw seemed to tell me this in a different way, as if the entire place was one huge, brutal lesson in responsibility, choice, and regret. I also saw people who seemed to be isolated, surrounded by invisible walls. They were not being tormented by demons or flames, but by something much deeper: silence. This silence was so thick that it could almost be heard, and it was obvious that it was consuming these people from the inside. As I watched, I realized they were trapped in their own thoughts, reliving memories that tormented them. It was as if they were in a prison built by their own regrets, unable to escape the truths they had avoided in life. One of the greatest revelations I was shown, however, was about the power of indifference. I saw a field where people walked aimlessly, as if they were in a state of eternal torpor. Their faces were blank, emotionless, expressionless. They didn't scream, they didn't cry, they didn't fight. They just wandered, trapped in an apathy that was more terrifying than any physical torment. I understood that these were the people who, in life, simply chose not to choose, who ignored opportunities to change, who preferred to conform to what was comfortable, instead of seeking the truth. It was at that moment that a voice sounded around me, but it was not the voice of a dark entity. It was something different, something that seemed to come from inside me, but also from outside. The voice said, "Every choice has a price, and those who choose to ignore the price will eventually face it here." These words echoed within me, making it clear that the revelations that were being shown were not just for those trapped there, but also for me. It was as if I was being warned, as if there was still time to change, to understand the weight of my actions before it was too late. These visions left an impression on me in a way I cannot fully describe. They were not just scenes of suffering, but living lessons, messages intended for anyone willing to listen. And as I watched, I began to wonder, how many of us are ignoring the signs? How many of us live as if our actions have no consequences, as if there is always time to change? If you have ever felt like the world around you is trying to show you something, or if you believe there is more going on than we can see, write in the comments, "I choose to see the truth," or share your experiences, because often, by listening to each other's stories, we can find the answers we seek. In the depths of despair, when it seemed like there was no way out or no end to what was before me, something began to change. The environment around me, filled with living shadows, torments, and unbearable revelations, began to pulse with a presence I could not understand. At first, it was just a subtle feeling, like the weight of the place was starting to lift, but it was so light I almost didn't notice it. Still, even in that oppressive environment, there was something different. It was as if an invisible and powerful force was beginning to break down the barriers of that world. The screams that had once echoed in all directions began to subside, not because they had disappeared, but because another, larger and stronger presence was becoming evident. It was a light, but this light was not like the one I had seen before, which exposed the painful truths and choices that had led souls to that place. This was different. It was a warm, welcoming light, but also full of authority. It seemed to appear from a distant point, but with each moment it grew closer, more intense. The first thing I felt when this light began to envelop the environment was a mixture of fear and hope. It was as if my soul knew that something divine was approaching, something that could not be explained by the rules of that place. It was a presence so pure that it seemed almost incompatible with hell. However, at the same time, it was evident that this presence had complete dominance there. The dark entities that previously surrounded me began to retreat, as if they could not withstand the force that accompanied this light. It was as if for the first time they were powerless. It was then that I realized the impact of this light on me. Unlike what happened to the souls around me, who seemed tormented by the exposure of their truths, I felt something different. It was as if the light was excavating layers of fear, guilt, and pain within me, but in a way that brought liberation, not torment. It not only showed me who I was, but gave me the chance to understand what I could still be. This light did not have a physical form, but its presence was undeniable. She was at once soft and ruthless, gentle and full of power. When she finally got to the closest point to where I was, I heard a voice. It was not a voice like that of demons, full of hatred and accusation. It was a voice full of authority, but also compassion. It didn't just echo around me, but within me, as if it were something I always knew existed, but had forgotten. "I see you." Those were the first words I heard, and they hit me in a way I can't describe. It wasn't just a sentence. It was a calling, an affirmation that carried enormous weight. It was as if everything I had experienced, every choice, every moment of despair, every silent scream that had never been heard, was being recognized by that presence. For a moment, I thought I was about to be judged, that voice was there to condemn everything I had done wrong. But what came next was something that completely changed the way I saw that place and my own existence. "You were created for more than that." These words brought home a truth I had never considered. Despite all the mistakes, all the bad decisions, there was still a greater purpose, a possibility of redemption that I had never fully understood. As these words echoed inside me, the light began to move around me, almost as if it was examining every part of me. And as I did so, I began to feel something I thought I would never feel in that place: hope. It was as if this light was peeling away layers of darkness I didn't even know I carried, revealing parts of me that were still worth saving. The entities that were once so confident in their power were now completely still, as if that light was something they could not face. And all the while, the voice continued speaking. "Every choice has a price, but the price has already been paid. What remains is to decide who you want to be." These words were so clear, so full of meaning, that everything around me began to change. The place was still the same, but its oppression seemed to be lessening, as if the very presence of that light was breaking the chains that bound me. For a moment, I felt completely vulnerable, like everything I was exposed. But at the same time, I felt a peace that I had never experienced. It was as if that light was telling me that despite everything I had done, there was still a choice, there was still a way back. This realization was so powerful that for a moment I forgot where I was. If you have ever felt that, even in the most difficult moments, there is something greater watching over you. Write in the comments, "I believe in light," or if you've experienced something that completely changed your perspective, share your story. You never know who might be inspired by what you have to say. When the light that surrounded me began to dissipate, I was overcome by a new sensation. It was no longer the crushing weight of hell, nor the cold emptiness that seemed to penetrate to the bone. It was something different, as if a part of me had been awakened from a deep sleep. At the same time, an avalanche of thoughts and emotions took over my mind. Everything I had experienced, every vision, every revelation, every word spoken by that divine presence, continued to echo within me, like a reminder that nothing, absolutely nothing, would be the same as before. The world around me seemed distant, almost unreal. It was as if I was carrying with me a secret so big that no other person could understand it. Looking at ordinary things, a blue sky, a busy street, the sound of laughter, everything seemed different. It was as if a veil had been removed, revealing the invisible layers of reality. I didn't just see what was on the surface. I felt the spiritual weight that each moment carried, the impact of each decision that seemed so insignificant, but could resonate for eternity. The first thing I noticed was how much my perspective on life had changed. Before, I lived for the now, worrying about problems that, in the grand scheme of things, meant nothing. Things like status, money, petty fights, they all seemed so distant now, so irrelevant. It was as if my experience in hell had completely rearranged my priorities. I had seen up close what happens when we neglect the things that really matter, and it changed me in ways I never could have imagined. However, the most profound change happened within me. It wasn't just a matter of seeing life differently, but of feeling like something in me had been broken so that it could be rebuilt. My pride, my stubbornness, my belief that I was in control of everything, all of that had been shattered. In its place was a humility I had never felt before, an understanding that I was not in charge, that there was something much larger guiding and watching my every move. But this new perspective did not come without challenges. Sharing what I had experienced was like carrying a burden and a gift at the same time. How can you explain to other people something so intense, so beyond what words can describe? I often found myself hesitating, wondering if anyone would believe me or if they would just laugh, call it delusion, a fabrication. But deep down, I knew that there was a purpose for what I experienced, that it wasn't just for me. It was a message, a warning, something I needed to convey to anyone willing to listen. The feeling of urgency was also something that wouldn't leave me alone. Every day, I felt like time was running faster, like there was an invisible battle going on all around us, and few people really noticed it. It was as if the world was distracted, too busy with passing things, while the doors of hell continued to open for those who didn't see the traps in their lives. I could no longer be indifferent to this. Something that impacted me deeply was how I started to see people. Before, it was easy to judge, point out other people's mistakes, blame someone for things that went wrong. But after what I experienced, I realized that everyone is fighting their own invisible battles. Each one carries wounds, traumas, poor choices, and often they don't even realize how close they are to the traps that I saw up close. It didn't make me agree with everything or tolerate error, but it gave me a compassion I had never felt before. Another change was the way I started to value prayer. Before, I saw prayer as something ritualistic, almost mechanical, something that was part of the routine, but without much real connection. Now I understood the power that each word has. I saw in hell how much the enemy fears prayer, how it is a flame that darkness cannot extinguish, and it made me pray harder, not just for myself, but for everyone around me. I began to pray for people who didn't even know they needed it, for the lost, for those who were so distracted by the world that they didn't realize how close the abyss was. The revelations I brought from that experience continue to transform me to this day. It was not an isolated event, but something that triggered a series of changes that continue to shape who I am. I still struggle with doubts, with fears, with life's challenges, but now I know I'm not alone. I know there is a greater purpose in everything, even the things that seem small and insignificant. If you've ever felt like something in your life has changed in a way you never expected, share your experience in the comments. Write "My life changed," or tell how your perspectives were transformed by something you experienced. Your words could be the inspiration someone needs to take the next step. As my life began to change after that experience, I realized that the greatest revelations were not just about hell itself, but about how the choices we make here, every day, shape our eternal destiny. The visions and words that were revealed to me were not just for me, but for everyone who still has the opportunity to change their trajectories. I began to see clearly that the greatest danger we face is not chaos or obvious sins, but indifference, that state of life where we don't pay attention to what we are actually cultivating in our hearts and souls. Life often seems to push us into an endless rush. We are constantly busy, worried about deadlines, goals, desires, and everyday problems. But have you ever stopped to think about what all this means in the long term? We are so focused on what we want or what we miss that we ignore the small decisions we make every day that are actually shaping who we are. The hell I saw was not just a physical place. It was a reflection of accumulated choices that often go unnoticed. Have you ever found yourself thinking, what really matters in my life? I didn't do that before my experience. I was always trying to solve immediate problems, looking for quick answers, ignoring the impact of the small actions and decisions I made. It was only when I faced the consequences of a spiritual world that I realized how crucial it is to live with purpose, with attention, and above all, with awareness. Every word spoken, every attitude taken, every thought has a weight that we often ignore until it's too late. It's difficult to talk about this because most people prefer not to face this reality. It's easier to think that there is always time, that today's mistakes can be corrected tomorrow, but tomorrow is not guaranteed. I saw people in hell who thought exactly like that. They thought they had control, that they could delay their decisions, that they could live for themselves for now and fix things later. The problem is that no one knows when it will be too late. This experience made me realize something powerful. What happens inside us is just as important as what happens outside. Hell doesn't just begin when we cross a spiritual boundary. It starts in the choices we make here, in the things we let grow in our hearts. When we feed pride, hatred, envy, or even apathy, we are planting seeds that, if not uprooted, can grow until they consume us. Have you ever reflected on what you are feeding into your life? It's easy to get distracted, forget what really matters. Maybe you're focused on accumulating assets, achieving status, overcoming someone in a dispute that may not even make sense in the end. But when we stop to think about what we really take with us, we realize that many of these things are fleeting, empty. I learned this the hard way, and now I feel it's my responsibility to share this with anyone willing to listen. Life is not just about the big moments, but about the little decisions we make along the way. Each of them builds the foundation of the person we become. What do you choose today? What kind of person are you becoming? It doesn't matter where you are now or what you've done in the past. There is always an opportunity to change, to choose a different path. The message I received in that light was clear. While there is life, there is hope. But this hope only comes true when we act, when we make conscious decisions that reflect the kind of life we want to live. And I know that changing is not easy. It is much more comfortable to continue on automatic, leaving things as they are, avoiding internal confrontation. But I've seen what happens when we ignore the signs, when we let time pass without reflecting on what we're really building. I saw the consequences of living without intention, of neglecting what really matters. And so, today I want to invite you. Take a moment to reflect on your life, your choices, your thoughts. Ask yourself, if I died today, would I be satisfied with the person I have become? What am I cultivating in my soul? These are not easy questions, but they are necessary. Don't wait for tomorrow to think about it. Do it now. If you feel like there is something that needs to change, write in the comments. I choose to live with purpose. Or if you've ever had a moment where you realized you needed to transform your life, share your story. Many times our experiences can touch someone else's life and help them see something that they couldn't do on their own. No matter where you are on your journey, I want you to know that there is still time. There is still a way. As long as you are here, as long as your heart still beats, there is hope to rewrite your story. You don't have to do this alone. You have the choice to seek the light, to break the chains that bind you, to live a life that not only avoids hell, but reflects the glory of something much greater. Write this journey with me, and let's find the purpose that transforms lives together. If you've made it this far, I want to say that nothing is by chance. There is a reason why you watch this video until the end, and I believe that God is speaking to you, touching your heart in a unique and special way. Every word, every revelation shared here is meant to remind us that as long as we are alive, there is hope, there is redemption, and there is a path to transformation. I want to hear from you. How did this video impact your life? How did this message speak to your heart? Leave it here in the comments. I felt God's voice in this video, and share what you felt. What went through your mind while watching? Remember that often by sharing what God is doing in our lives, we can be the key to touching the heart of someone else who needs to hear just that. I also want to invite you to be part of this journey. If this transformative message spoke to you, be sure to subscribe to the channel. Here, we are committed to bringing content that not only touches, but awakens, challenges, and renews. Each video is made with a heart to help you reflect on your life and find your divine purpose. Also leave your like, because when you do this, you are helping this message reach even more people who may be facing spiritual battles or who need a word of hope and encouragement. Imagine how many lives can be transformed just because you clicked a button and helped this message reach further. And don't stop here. The next video is already on the end screen, waiting for you. In it, we continue this spiritual journey, bringing even more revelations and reflections that can change lives. Don't miss the opportunity to hear what God still has to say to you. May God bless your life powerfully. May He renew your strength, illuminate your path, and bring peace to your heart. And always remember, you are not alone. Every step, every prayer, every decision you make can bring you closer to the light. Until the next video.